It was nearly 11 years ago when my great-grandmother passed away. She was 91, and her death was as agonizing as it was inevitable. I still remember her frail form, shrouded in silence as the family gathered around her. Her last days were marked by pain that seemed to seep into the very walls of our house, leaving an invisible scar. For me, a child back then, it was the first real brush with death, and it shook me to my core. She died 13 days after her birthday. 13, a number that seemed ominous even then. I didn't understand everything at the time, but I knew something about her death felt wrong, as if she hadn't fully left us. 3 days after her passing, I began having strange dreams. The first one was oddly mundane yet deeply unsettling. In the dream, my family was gathered on the veranda at my grandparents' house, as if nothing had happened. The setting was serene. The sun was low, casting a warm glow over everything, and the scent of freshly cooked food wafted through the air. We were eating dinner, laughing, sharing stories as we had so many times before. But then, something felt off. I knew she was dead. I knew my great-grandmother, whom we all called Baba, was gone. So why was there a plate of food being taken to her room? In the dream, I looked around, trying to make sense of the surreal scene. I could feel the collective discomfort, a sense that everyone else at the table knew, too, that Baba was no longer with us. But no one said a word. No one dared break the silence. Then, as if in response to my thoughts, Baba herself appeared. She shuffled onto the veranda, her familiar figure draped in the same scarf she always wore. She handed us a plate of food, her face expressionless, her eyes hollow. She looked at each of us as if she were assessing, waiting. The silent message in her gaze was clear. She wasn't leaving. She didn't want to go. I woke up in a cold sweat, my heart racing. I told myself it was just a dream, just the lingering grief playing tricks on my mind. But I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to it, something lurking just beneath the surface, waiting for me to uncover it. The dreams didn't stop. In fact, they became worse, more vivid, each one leaving a deeper scar on my psyche. Weeks after that first vision, I had another dream of Baba, a dream that would haunt me for years. This time, we were gathered in the hall of my grandmother's house, watching television, just an ordinary family moment. My grandmother was talking, chatting away as if nothing were wrong. Then, out of nowhere, she turned to me and said, "Baba is coming." I felt a chill run down my spine. I knew, with a bone-deep certainty, that this wasn't right. Baba was gone. She was dead. But before I could say anything, I saw her. She entered the room slowly, her form thin and twisted, a mere shadow of the woman she once was. Her skin hung off her bones, papery and thin, and her face was skeletal, hollow, as if death had stripped away all that was human. But the worst part, the part that still sends shivers down my spine to this day, was her eyes. Or rather, what used to be her eyes. They were empty sockets, yet within them burned small, flickering flames, like candles in a darkened room. Those tiny flames stared into my soul, filled with an unspoken rage and sorrow, a hunger that seemed endless. She looked at each of us in turn, and when her gaze settled on me, I felt as if I couldn't breathe, couldn't move. She was more than just a ghost. She was a specter of death itself, lingering where she didn't belong. I woke up screaming, and that night I cried until dawn. My family tried to comfort me, to assure me it was only a nightmare. But I knew it was more than that. Baba's spirit wasn't at rest, and now, for some reason, she was reaching out to me. 3 years passed, and although the dreams faded, I never truly forgot. Baba's image, her skeletal face, those eyes like burning candles. They were etched into my mind, a haunting memory that refused to fade. I avoided talking about her, buried the memories as best as I could, trying to convince myself that it had all been in my head. Then, one day, I learned that my aunt and cousin were planning to visit my grandmother's house. My cousin, a baby girl named Vasilisa, was barely a few months old. My aunt wanted to introduce her to the family, to bring some joy and light back into the old house. The night before their arrival, I had another dream. This one was different from the others. There was no horror, no deathly image. It was simply Baba. She looked as she had in life, sitting on her favorite chair in the living room, wrapped in the familiar scarf she always wore. In the dream, she smiled at me, her eyes kind and gentle, the way they used to be. She leaned forward, and I could hear her voice, as soft as a whisper. "I'm so happy that Vajja is here. I've been waiting for her." Her words echoed in my mind, filling me with a mixture of comfort and unease. But then, as if a switch had flipped, something within me turned cold. A realization hit me, clear and undeniable. This isn't right. She's not supposed to be here. I don't know what came over me, but in that moment, I began shouting at her in the dream. My voice was loud, angry, filled with an emotion I couldn't fully understand. "You're not alive," I screamed. "You don't belong here. Go. Leave us." The expression on Baba's face shifted. Her smile faded, replaced by a look of sadness and hurt. And then, just as suddenly as she had appeared, she was gone. I awoke feeling both relieved and guilty. I had banished her, forced her away. But I couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning, that she wasn't truly gone. After that night, the dreams stopped. For years, Baba didn't visit me again, and I allowed myself to believe that I had finally laid her spirit to rest. Life moved on, and memories of her faded, blending into the past. But then, on the 10th anniversary of her death, something changed. That evening, I was alone in my room when I heard a soft tapping at the window. My heart skipped a beat, and a chill crept over me. It was impossible. My window was on the second floor, overlooking an empty yard. There was no way anyone could be standing outside. Yet the tapping continued, gentle but insistent. My mind raced, filling with memories of those old dreams, and a familiar sense of dread washed over me. Taking a deep breath, I pulled back the curtain. There was nothing there, only the dark, empty yard. But as I turned away from the window, I caught a glimpse of something in the glass. It was Baba's reflection. She stood behind me, her face twisted in sorrow, her eyes filled with that familiar candlelight glow. But this time, she didn't look angry or vengeful. She looked pleading. A soft voice filled my head, barely a whisper. "Please, let me in." I stumbled backward, my mind racing. What did she want? Why was she still here, after all these years? I was terrified, but part of me wanted to reach out, to find out what had kept her spirit bound to this world. It felt like she was trying to tell me something important that I had been ignoring. But I couldn't bring myself to respond. Instead, I watched as her reflection faded, leaving only my own pale face staring back at me. Desperate for answers, I went to my grandmother the next day and asked her about Baba's last days. My grandmother hesitated, as if reluctant to open old wounds, but finally, she began to speak. She told me that in the weeks leading up to Baba's death, she had been different, restless, as if she knew her time was coming. She had spoken of unfinished business, of things she wished she had done differently. And on her final night, she had whispered something strange to my grandmother. She said she'd be back, my grandmother said, her voice shaking. She said she'd come back to see the family one last time. But I didn't understand what she meant. Realizing that Baba's spirit was trapped by regrets, I knew what I had to do. That night, I lit a candle and placed it by the window. I sat there, waiting, hoping that Baba would come to me one last time. As midnight approached, I saw her reflection in the glass. She looked tired, weary, as if the weight of the world rested on her shoulders. I took a deep breath and spoke to her, my voice soft but firm. "It's time to go, Baba," I said. "Whatever you wanted to say, you've said it. You don't have to stay anymore. Rest now." For a moment, she simply stared at me, her expression unreadable. Then slowly she nodded. Her face softened, and the glow in her eyes flickered like a candle about to go out. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice faint, almost lost in the night. And then, as I watched, she faded away, leaving only the candle's flame dancing in the dark. I felt a sense of peace wash over me, as if a long-forgotten weight had finally been lifted. Baba never came to me in my dreams again. And though I still remember those haunting visions, I know now that she has found the rest she deserved. After that final farewell, I thought Baba's spirit had finally moved on. The candlelight dreams, the chilling reflections, everything had stopped, and I allowed myself to breathe easy again. Life returned to a semblance of normalcy, and the haunting memories of her skeletal face and flickering eyes became just that, memories. But exactly 1 year later, on the anniversary of her death, something changed. That night, I was alone in my room when a familiar chill washed over me. I heard a faint whisper, a voice calling my name. At first, I thought I was imagining things, that it was just my mind playing tricks on me. But then I saw it. A faint flicker of light on my wall, moving slowly, like the glow of a candle. My heart pounded as I followed the light to my window. As I looked out into the darkness, I felt an overwhelming sense of déjà vu. There was no candle, no one standing outside. But in the reflection of the glass I saw her again, Baba. She was just as I remembered her. Thin, with hollow cheeks. But this time her expression was one of desperation. She pressed her hand against the glass, and I could see her mouth moving, though no sound escaped. It was as if she was pleading, trying to tell me something I couldn't hear. I wanted to run, to hide, but something kept me rooted to the spot. Baba had returned, and I realized with a sinking feeling that her spirit had never truly been at rest. She had unfinished business, something that bound her to this world, and somehow it involved me. The next morning, I went to my grandmother's house, determined to learn the truth. If Baba's spirit was still lingering, there had to be a reason. My grandmother greeted me with a weary smile, and I could see the lines of worry etched deep into her face. "I thought you'd let this go," she said quietly, as if reading my thoughts. "I tried," I replied, my voice trembling. "But she came back. There's something she wants, and I think she's trying to tell me." After a long pause, my grandmother nodded. She led me up to the attic, a place I had rarely ventured. The attic was cluttered with boxes and old furniture, relics of the past covered in dust. In the far corner, hidden beneath layers of forgotten memories, was a small chest. "This belonged to Baba," my grandmother said, her voice barely above a whisper. "She kept it locked, never let anyone open it. I never knew what was inside, and after she passed, I didn't have the heart to look." With trembling hands, I lifted the lid of the chest. Inside, I found letters, old photographs, and a small bundle of papers tied with a ribbon. The photographs showed Baba as a young woman, standing with a man I didn't recognize. She looked happy, her face filled with a light I had never seen in her during her later years. Among the papers was a letter addressed to my grandmother, written in Baba's delicate handwriting. The words were faded, but still legible. "To my dearest, there is something I must confess before I leave this world. Something I have hidden, even from myself." The letter trailed off, incomplete. My heart raced as I stared at the unfinished words, a chill settling over me. It seemed Baba had been haunted by a secret all her life, a secret she had taken to her grave. But now her spirit was determined to reveal it. That night, I couldn't shake the image of Baba's face, her sorrowful eyes, and the unfinished letter. I returned home, clutching one of the old photographs. A picture of Baba and the mysterious man, standing together in what looked like a field of wildflowers. I had never seen this man before, and my grandmother had never mentioned him. Who was he, and why was he with Baba in such an intimate photograph? The more I stared at the picture, the more the face of the man seemed to shift, almost as if he were alive, staring back at me. Then, in a flash of realization, I noticed something I had missed before. In the background of the photograph, almost hidden in the shadows, was a figure, a young child, no more than 3 or 4 years old. A sense of dread filled me as the pieces began to fall into place. Baba had a child she had never spoken of. My grandmother wasn't her only child. This child was someone else, a forgotten part of her life that she had kept hidden, possibly abandoned. But why? And what did it have to do with the haunting? Determined to find answers, I reached out to an old friend of Baba's, one of the last people still alive who had known her in her youth. She hesitated, but finally admitted that Baba had once been involved with a man named Mikhail. They were deeply in love, but something had happened, something tragic, that had caused Baba to turn her back on him, and, perhaps, on their child. He disappeared, the friend said quietly, and she never spoke of him again. But some of us believed she carried the guilt of his death all her life. The weight of Baba's secret pressed down on me, a secret that had remained buried for decades. Mikhail had disappeared, and Baba had cut herself off from his memory. Had she abandoned him, or was there something darker at play? As I delved further, I began to feel Baba's presence more strongly. Shadows shifted in the corners of my room, and the faint smell of candle wax lingered in the air. It was as if she were there, watching me, waiting for me to uncover the truth. Then, one night, I had another dream. I was in Baba's old house, sitting in her room, surrounded by darkness. In the corner of the room, a shadow moved. A child, small and fragile, standing in the dark with his back turned to me. Slowly, he turned around, his face pale, his eyes hollow. He looked at me with an expression of sorrow and confusion, as if he didn't understand why he had been left behind. "Where is she?" he whispered, his voice faint and ghostly. "Where is Mama?" I reached out to him, but before I could touch him, he faded, disappearing into the shadows. I woke up with tears streaming down my face, the pain of the abandoned child echoing in my heart. The child was Baba's. The spirit that haunted me wasn't just her. It was the ghost of her lost child, a child who had died waiting for a mother who never returned. With the realization of the abandoned child's spirit, I understood that Baba's soul had been tormented by regret and guilt. Her spirit had clung to our family, unable to let go because of the unresolved pain she carried to her grave. Determined to bring peace to both Baba and the child, I went back to the attic one last time. I took the photograph of Baba and Mikhail, and I lit a candle in their memory, speaking softly into the quiet air. "Baba, I know your secret now," I said, my voice breaking. "You don't have to carry this pain any longer. Your child has waited long enough. Go to him. Find peace." As the candle flickered, I felt a warmth settle over the room. A feeling of profound calm washed over me, and in that moment, I knew they were finally free. Baba and her child, reunited in death, could finally rest. Since that night, I haven't felt her presence. The cold, the tapping, the eerie dreams, all of it stopped. My great-grandmother's spirit had finally moved on, her soul released from the burdens she had carried in life. But sometimes, in the quiet moments before dawn, I feel a gentle warmth, like a silent blessing. I like to think it's Baba, watching over me from a place of peace, her story finally complete.